Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I need to take a minute to thank everyone who has been listening to the show since it started back in 2019. To those people who have listened, shared, and supported the show in many wonderful and kind ways, the podcast is still around thanks to you. What I'd really like to ask for at this time of year where people are often stressed out or very busy with the business of celebration is for you to spread the word. I don't advertise. I'm not sure how I could effectively advertise. So I need your help to help me grow the show and to reach new people. There are a lot of people out there struggling to sleep, so if you know someone cranky and listless thanks to their struggles, just tell them about Sleepy Time Tales. And if you tell people on social media, please make sure to tag me in. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter, so I can see and I can thank you. If you'd like to support Sleepy Time Tales in other ways, like, for example, backing it on Patreon, that would be really helpful as well. Patreon is a monthly support system that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can get you fun bonuses based on how much you contribute. And there are goal-based bonuses that go out to all listeners when we reach those goals. But if monthly seems like a big ask, then you can make once-off tips through buymeacoffee.com/sleepytimetales or the tip jar on the website. I've also got some basic merchandise in a TeePublic store which you can purchase through the show notes or via the website at merch.sleepytimetales.net. And not only is there Sleepy Time Tales merchandise there, but I've shared the works from some other fun creators that I thought would be cool to give some exposure to. And last but not least, of course, I need to shout out the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. The music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. Thank you for taking the time. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? But in 2021, the lack of sleep is a health crisis, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night. Or maybe sometimes background noise or even company. That's why I make these episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you without any pressure of the end coming. Now, as far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage. The primary idea behind Sleepy Time Tales is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough, not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for you. But maybe you need something a bit different. Maybe you just need something in the background. These days, well, actually traditionally, people often liked the television or the radio. In this day and age, maybe you would listen to streaming music or YouTube. Some people like the sound of the wind in the trees or rain or the sound of the ocean. And maybe for you, the key is some boring dude just droning on in the background. But however you're engaging with it, it's important that you don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now obviously I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is important that you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, it probably won't work for you. I suggest giving it a good solid 3 nights try. If by the end of that it's not working, then maybe I'm not the guy for you. But it can probably take as long as that to get over the sort of resistance. The idea of getting used to listening to my voice, the sound of my accent, or maybe just the strangeness of the idea of trusting someone to speak to you while you're sleeping. Also, maybe one episode isn't long enough. Maybe you need a little bit more time, or maybe your problem isn't so much the going to sleep. Maybe you wake up in the middle of the night. What I recommend doing, because it's what works for me, is to let the podcast run all night. With the stuff that I listen to, I download enough episodes to make sure that I can get through the night, pop my earbuds in when I go back to sleep, and I'm usually out pretty quickly. But then I wake up again at 3 a.m. and when I realize I'm awake, I pop the earbuds back in and whoop, straight back to sleep again. I even suggest that you can do the same thing later in the night, or rather later in the morning. If you wake up 60 minutes or even 30 minutes before the alarm, try the same thing. And you may wonder what the point is. After all, what is 30 minutes sleep in the context of a whole night if you've been struggling? But I've had people thank me for suggesting they try this because there is something about allowing yourself deep relaxation right before the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new level. So however you're engaging with it, whenever you're listening to it, whenever you're finding it the most useful, it's very important as you listen to Sleepy Time Tales to just try relax. This, I'm sure, seems a bit strange to you at first, so just try relax and give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you wouldn't be hearing me, except maybe in a dream. This year, we return to The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. How Bessie Blithesome Came to the Laughing Valley. One day, as Claus sat before his door to enjoy the sunshine while he busily carved the heads and horns of a toy deer, he looked up and discovered a glittering cavalcade of horsemen approaching through the valley. When they drew nearer, he saw that the band consisted of a score of men-at-arms, clad in bright armor and bearing in their hands spears and battle-axes. In front of these rode little Betty Blithesome, the pretty daughter of the proud Lord of Lurd, who had once driven Claus from his palace. Her palfrey was pure white, its bridle was covered with glittering gems, and its saddle draped with cloth of gold, richly broidered. The soldiers were sent to protect her from harm while she journeyed. Claus was surprised, but he continued to whittle and to sing until the cavalcade drew up before him. Then the little girl leaned over the neck of her palfrey and said, "Please, Mr. Claus, I want a toy." Her voice was so pleading that Claus jumped up at once and stood beside her. But he was puzzled how to answer her request. "You are a rich lord's daughter," said he, "and have all that you desire." "Except toys," added Bessie. "There are no toys in all the world but yours. And I make them for the poor children, who have nothing else to amuse them," continued Claus. "Do poor children love to play with toys more than rich ones?" asked Bessie. "I suppose not," said Claus thoughtfully. "Am I to blame because my father is a lord? Must I be denied the pretty toys I long for because other children are poorer than I? she inquired earnestly. I'm afraid you must, dear, he answered, for the poor have nothing else with which to amuse themselves. You have your pony to ride, your servants to wait on you, and every comfort that money can procure. But I want toys, cried Bessie, wiping away the tears that forced themselves into her eyes. If I cannot have them, I shall be very unhappy. Claus was troubled, for her grief recalled to him the thought that his desire was to make all children happy, without regard to their condition in life. Yet, while so many poor children were clamouring for his toys, he could not bear to give one of them to Bessie Blithesome, who had so much already to make her happy. Listen, my child, said he gently. All the toys I am now making are promised to others, but the next shall be yours, since your heart so longs for it. Come to me again in 2 days, and it shall be ready for you. Bessie gave a cry of delight, and leaning over her pony's neck, she kissed Claus prettily upon his forehead. Then calling to her men-at-arms, she rode gaily away, leaving Claus to resume his work. If I am to supply the rich children as well as the poor ones, he thought, I shall not have a spare moment in the whole year. But is it right I should give to the rich? Surely I must go to Necile and talk with her about this matter. So when he had finished the toy deer, which was very like a deer he had known in the forest glades, he went into Bersey and made his way to the bower of the beautiful nymph Necile, who had been his foster-mother. She greeted him tenderly and lovingly, listening with interest to his story of the visit of Bessie Blithesome. And now tell me, said he, shall I give toys to rich children? We of the forest know nothing of riches, she replied. It seems to me that one child is like another child, since they are all made of the same clay, and that riches are like a gown which may be put on or taken away, leaving the child unchanged. But the fairies are guardians of mankind, and no mortal children better than I. Let us call the fairy queen. This was done, and the queen of the fairies sat beside them and heard Claus relate his reasons for thinking the rich children could get along without his toys, and also what the nymph had said. Necile is right, declared the queen, for whether it be rich or poor, a child's longing for pretty playthings are but natural. Rich Bessie's heart may suffer as much grief as poor Mary's. She can be just as lonely and discontented, and just as gay and happy. I think, friend Claus, it is your duty to make all little ones glad, whether they chance to live in palaces or in cottages. Your words are wise, fair queen, replied Claus, and my heart tells me they are as just as they are wise. Hereafter all children may claim my services. Then he bowed before the gracious fairy, and kissing Necile's red lips went back into his valley. At the brook he stopped to drink, and afterward he sat on the bank and took a piece of moist clay in his hands, while he thought what sort of toy he should make for Bessie Blithesome. He did not notice that his fingers were working the clay into shape, until glancing downward he found he had unconsciously formed a head that bore a slight resemblance to the nymph Necile. At once he became interested. Gathering more of the clay from the bank, he carried it to his house. Then, with the aid of his knife and a bit of wood, he succeeded in working the clay into the image of a toy nymph. With skilful strokes he formed long waving hair on the head, and covered the body with a gown of oak leaves, while the 2 feet sticking out at the bottom of the gown were clad in sandals. But the clay was soft, and Claus found he must handle it gently to avoid ruining his pretty work. Perhaps the rays of the sun will draw out the moisture, and caused the clay to become hard, he thought. So he laid the image on a flat board and placed it in the glare of the sun. This done, he went to his bench and began painting the toy deer, and soon he became so interested in the work that he forgot all about the clay nymph. But next morning, happening to notice it as it lay on the board, he found the sun had baked it to the hardness of stone, and it was strong enough to be safely handled. Claus now painted the nymph with great care in the likeness of Necile, giving it deep blue eyes, white teeth, rosy lips, and ruddy brown hair. The gown he coloured oak leaf green, and when the paint was dry, Claus himself was charmed with the new toy. Of course, it was not nearly so lovely as the real Necile, but considering the material of which it was made, Claus thought it was very beautiful. When Bessie, riding upon her white palfrey, came to his dwelling next day, Claus presented her with the new toy. The little girl's eyes were brighter than ever as she examined the pretty image, and she loved it at once and held it close to her breast as a mother does to her child. "What is it called, Claus?" she asked. Now Claus knew that nymphs do not like to be spoken of by mortals, so he could not tell Bessie it was an image of Necile he had given her. But as it was a new toy, he searched his mind for a new name to call it by, and the first word he thought of he decided would do very well. "It is called a dolly, my dear," he said to Bessie. "I shall call the dolly my baby," returned Bessie, kissing it fondly, "and I shall tend it and care for it just as nurse cares for me." "Thank you very much, Claus. Your gift has made me happier than I have ever been before." Then she rode away, hugging the toy in her arms, and Claus, seeing her delight, thought he would make another dolly, better and more natural than the first. He brought more clay from the brook, and remembering that Bessie had called the dolly her baby, he resolved to form this one into a baby's image. That was no difficult task to the clever workman, and soon the baby dolly was lying on the board, and placed in the sun to dry. Then, with the clay that was left, he began to make an image of Bessie Blithesome herself. This was not so easy, for he found he could not make the silken robe of the Lord's daughter out of the common clay. So he called the fairies to his aid and asked them to bring him coloured silks, with which to make a real dress for the clay image. The fairies set off at once on their errand, and before nightfall they returned with a generous supply of silks and laces and golden threads. Claus now became impatient to complete his new dolly, and instead of waiting for the next day's sun, he placed the clay image upon his hearth and covered it over with glowing coals. By morning, when he drew the dolly from the ashes, it had baked as hard as if it had lain a full day in the hot sun. Now our Claus became a dressmaker as well as a toy-maker. He cut the lavender silk and nearly sewed it into a beautiful gown that just fitted the new dolly. And he put a lace collar around its neck and pink silk shoes on its feet. The natural colour of baked clay is a light grey, but Claus painted the face to resemble the colour of flesh, and he gave the dolly Bessie's brown eyes and golden hair and rosy cheeks. It was really a beautiful thing to look upon, and sure to bring joy to some childish heart. While Claus was admiring it, he heard a knock at his door, and little Mary entered. Her face was sad and her eyes red with continued weeping. "Why, what has grieved you, my dear?" asked Claus, taking the child in his arms. I've broke my cat," sobbed Mary. "How?" he inquired, his eyes twinkling. I dropped him, and broke off him's tail, and then I dropped him and broke off him's ear, and now he's all spoilt." Claus laughed. "Never mind, Mary dear. How would you like this new dolly instead of a cat?" Mary looked at the silk-robed dolly, and her eyes grew big with astonishment. "Oh, Claus," she cried, clapping her small hands together with rapture. "Can I have a beautiful lady?" "Do you like it?" he asked. "I love it," said she. "It's better than tats." "Then take it, dear, and be careful not to break it." Mary took the dolly with a joy that was almost reverent, and her face dimpled with smiles as she started along the path toward home. The wickedness of the Augurs. I must now tell you something about the Augurs, that terrible race of creatures which caused our good Claus so much trouble, and nearly succeeded in robbing the children of the world of their earliest and best friend. I do not like to mention the Augurs, but they are part of this history and cannot be ignored. They were neither mortals nor immortals, but stood midway between those classes of being. The Augurs were invisible to ordinary people, but not to immortals. They could pass swiftly through the air from one part of the world to another, and had the power of influencing the minds of human beings to do their wicked will. They were of gigantic stature and had coarse, scowling countenances, which showed plainly their hatred of all mankind. They possessed no consciences whatever and delighted only in evil deeds. Their homes were in rocky, mountainous places, from whence they sallied forth to accomplish their wicked purposes. The one of their number that could think of the most horrible deed for them to do was always elected the King Augur, and all the race obeyed his orders. Sometimes these creatures lived to become 100 years old, but usually they fought so fiercely among themselves that many were destroyed in combat, and when they died, that was the end of them. Mortals were powerless to harm them, and the immortals shuddered when the Augurs were mentioned, and always avoided them. So they flourished for many years unopposed, and accomplished much evil. I am glad to assure you that these vile creatures have long since perished and passed from the earth. But in the days when Claus was making his first toys, they were a numerous and powerful tribe. One of the principal sports of the Augurs was to inspire angry passions in the hearts of little children, so that they quarrelled and fought with one another. They would tempt boys to eat of unripe fruit and then delight in the pain they suffered. They urged little girls to disobey their parents and then would laugh when the children were punished. I do not know what causes a child to be naughty in these days, but when the Augurs were on earth, naughty children were usually under their influence. Now when Claus began to make children happy, he kept them out of the power of the Augurs, for children possessing such lovely playthings as he gave them had no wish to obey the evil thoughts the Augurs tried to thrust into their minds. Therefore one year when the wicked tribe was to elect a new king, they chose an Augur who proposed to destroy Claus and take him away from the children. There are, as you know, fewer naughty children in the world since Claus came to the Laughing Valley and began to make his toys, said the new king as he squatted upon a rock and looked around at the scowling faces of his people. Why, Bessie Blithesome has not stamped her foot once this month, nor has Mary's brother slapped his sister's face or thrown the puppy into the rain barrel. Little Weekum took his bath last night without screaming or struggling, because his mother had promised he could take his toy cat to bed with him. Such a condition of affairs is awful for any Augur to think of, and the only way we can direct the naughty actions of children is to take this person Claus away from them. Good, good, cried the big Augurs in a chorus. and they clapped their hands to applaud the speech of the king. "But what shall we do with him?" asked one of the creatures. "I have a plan," replied the wicked king, "and what his plan was you will soon discover." That night Claus went to bed feeling very happy, for he had completed no less than 4 pretty toys during the day, and they were sure, he thought, to make 4 little children happy. But while he slept, the band of invisible augurs surrounded his bed, bound him with stout cords, and then flew away with him to the middle of a dark forest, and far off Ethop, where they laid him down and left him. When morning came, Claus found himself thousands of miles from any human being, a prisoner in the wild jungle of an unknown land. From the limb of a tree above his head swayed a huge python, one of those reptiles that are able to crush a man's bones in their coils. A few yards away crouched a savage panther, its glaring red eyes fixed full on the helpless Claus. One of those monstrous spotted spiders whose sting is death crept stealthily toward him over the matted leaves, which shriveled and turned black at its very touch. But Claus had been reared in Burzee, and was not afraid. "Come to me, ye knooks of the forest," he cried, and gave the low, peculiar whistle that the knooks know. The panther, which was about to spring upon its victim, turned and slunk away. The python swung itself into the tree and disappeared among the leaves. The spider stopped short in its advance and hid beneath a rotting log. Claus had no time to notice them, for he was surrounded by a band of harsh-featured knooks, more crooked and deformed in appearance than any he had ever seen. "Who are you that call on us?" demanded one in a gruff voice. "The friend of your brothers in Burzee," answered Claus. "I have been brought here by my enemies, the augurs, and left to perish miserably. Yet now I implore your help to release me and send me home again." "Have you the sign?" asked another. "Yes," said Claus. They cut his bonds, and with his free arms he made the secret sign of the knooks. Instantly they assisted him to stand upon his feet, and they brought him food and drink to strengthen him. "Our brothers of Burzee make queer friends," grumbled an ancient knook, whose flowing beard was pure white. "But he who knows our secret sign and signal is entitled to our help, whoever he may be. Close your eyes, stranger, and we will conduct you to your home." "Where shall we seek it?" "'Tis the Laughing Valley," answered Claus, shutting his eyes. "There is but one Laughing Valley in the known world, so we cannot go astray," remarked the knook. As he spoke, the sound of his voice seemed to die away, so Claus opened his eyes to see what had caused the change. To his astonishment, he found himself seated on the bench by his own door, with the Laughing Valley spread out before him. That day he visited the wood nymphs and related his adventure to Queen Zerline and Necile. "The augurs have become your enemies," said the lovely queen thoughtfully, "so we must do all we can to protect you from their power." "It was cowardly to bind him while he slept," remarked Necile with indignation. "The evil ones are ever cowardly," answered Zerline, "but our friend Slumber shall not be disturbed again." The queen herself came to the dwelling of Claus that evening, and placed her seal on every door and every window to keep out the augurs. And under the seal of Queen Zerline was placed the seal of the fairies and the seal of the Rulls and the seals of the knooks, that the charm might become more powerful. And Claus carried his toys to the children again, and made many more of the little ones happy. You may guess how angry the King Augur and his fierce band were when it was known to them that Claus had escaped from the forest of Ethop. They raged madly for a whole week, and then held another meeting among the rocks. "It is useless to carry him with a Knook's rein," said the king, "for he has their protection. So let us cast him into a cave of our own mountains, where he will surely perish." This was promptly agreed to, and the wicked band set out that night to seize Claus. But they found his dwelling guarded by the seals of the immortals, and were obliged to go away baffled and disappointed. "Never mind," said the king. "He does not sleep always." Next day, as Claus travelled to the village across the plain, where he intended to present a toy squirrel to a lame boy, he was suddenly set upon by the augurs, who seized him and carried him away to the mountains. There they thrust him within a deep cavern and rolled many huge rocks against the entrance to prevent his escape. Deprived thus of food and light, and with little air to breathe, our Claus was indeed in a pitiful plight. But he spoke the mystic words of the fairies, which always command their friendly aid, and they came to his rescue, and transported him to the Laughing Valley in the twinkling of an eye. Thus the augurs discovered they might not destroy one who had earned the friendship of the immortals. So the evil band sought other means of keeping Claus from bringing happiness to children, and so making them obedient. Whenever Claus set out to carry his toys to the little ones, an augur who had been set to watch his movements sprang upon him and snatched the toys from his grasp. And the children were no more disappointed than was Claus when he was obliged to return home disconsolate. Still he persevered, and made many toys for his little friends, and started with them for the villages. And always the augurs robbed him as soon as he had left the valley. They threw the stolen playthings into one of their lonely caverns, and quite a heap of toys accumulated before Claus became discouraged, and gave up all attempts to leave the valley. Then children began coming to him, since they found he did not go to them. But the wicked augurs flew around them and caused their steps to stray and the paths to become crooked, so never a little one could find a way into the Laughing Valley. Lonely days now fell upon Claus, for he was denied the pleasure of bringing happiness to the children whom he had learned to love. Yet he bore up bravely, for he thought surely the time would come when the augurs would abandon their evil designs to injure him. He devoted all his hours to toy-making, and when one plaything had been completed, he stood it on a shelf he had built for that purpose. When the shelf became filled with rows of toys, he made another one, and filled that also, so that in time he had many shelves filled with gay and beautiful toys, representing horses, dogs, cats, elephants, lambs, rabbits, and deer, as well as pretty dolls of all sizes, and balls and marbles of baked clay, painted in gay colors. Often as he glanced at this array of childish treasures, the heart of good old Claus became sad. So greatly did he long to carry the toys to his children. And at last, because he could bear it no longer, he ventured to go to the great Ak, to whom he had told the story of his persecution by the augurs, and begged the master woodsman to assist him. The great battle between good and evil. Ak listened gravely to the recital of Claus, and stroking his beard the while with the slow, graceful motion that betokened deep thought. He nodded approvingly when Claus told how the Knooks and the fairies had saved him from death, and frowned when he heard how the augurs had stolen the children's toys. At last he said, "From the beginning I have approved the work you are doing among the children of men, and it annoys me that your good deeds should be thwarted by the augurs. We immortals have no connection whatever with the evil creatures who have attacked you. Always have we avoided them, and they in turn have hitherto taken care not to cross our pathway. But in this matter I find they have interfered with one of our friends, and I will ask them to abandon their persecutions, as you are under our protection." Claus thanked the Master Woodsman most gratefully, and returned to his valley, while Uck, who never delayed carrying out his promises, at once travelled to the mountains of the Augurs. There, standing on the bare rocks, he called on the king and his people to appear. Instantly the place was filled with throngs of the scowling Augurs, and their king, perching himself on a point of rock, demanded fiercely, "Who dares call on us?" "It is I, the Master Woodsman of the world," responded Uck. "Here are no forests for you to claim," cried the king angrily. "We owe no allegiance to you, nor to any immortal." "That is true," replied Uck calmly. "Yet you have ventured to interfere with the actions of Claus, who dwells in the Laughing Valley and is under our protection." Many of the Augurs began muttering at this speech, and their king turned threateningly on the Master Woodsman. "You are set to rule the forests, but the plains and the valleys are ours," he shouted. "Keep to your own dark woods. We will do as we please with Claus." "You shall not harm our friend in any way," replied Uck. "Shall we not?" asked the king impudently. "You will see. Our powers are vastly superior to those of mortals, and fully as great as those of immortals." "It is your conceit that misleads you," said Uck sternly. "You are a transient race, passing from life into nothingness. We who live forever pity but despise you. On earth you are scorned by all, and in heaven you have no place. Even the mortals after their earth life enter another existence for all time, and so are your superiors. How then dare you, who are neither mortal nor immortal, refuse to obey my wish?" The Augurs sprang to their feet with menacing gestures, but their king motioned them back. "Never before," he cried to Uck, while his voice trembled with rage, "has an immortal declared himself the master of the Augurs. Never shall an immortal venture to interfere with our actions again, for we will avenge your scornful words by killing your friend Claus within 3 days. Nor you nor all the immortals can save him from our wrath. We defy your powers. Begone, Master Woodsman of the world. In the country of the Augurs you have no place." "It is war," declared Uck with flashing eyes. "It is war," returned the king savagely. "In 3 days your friend will be dead." The master turned away and came to his forest of Burzy, where he called a meeting of the immortals, and told them of the defiance of the Augurs, and the purpose to kill Claus within 3 days. The little folk listened to him quietly. "What shall we do?" asked Uck. "These creatures are of no benefit to the world," said the prince of the crooks. "We must destroy them." "Their lives are devoted only to evil deeds," said the prince of the rills. "We must destroy them." "They have no conscience, and endeavour to make all mortals as bad as themselves," said the queen of the fairies. "We must destroy them." "They have defied the great Uck, and threatened the life of our adopted son," said beautiful Queen Zerline. "We must destroy them." The Master Woodsman smiled. "You speak well," said he. "These Augurs are known to be a powerful race, and they will fight desperately. Yet the outcome is certain. For we who live can never die, even though conquered by our enemies. While every Ogre who is struck down is one foe the less to oppose us. Prepare then for battle, and let us resolve to show no mercy to the wicked. Thus arose the terrible war between the immortals and the spirits of evil, which is sung of in fairyland to this very day. The King Ogre and his band determined to carry out the threat to destroy Claus. They now hated him for two reasons. He made children happy, and was a friend of the Master Woodsman. But since Uck's visit they had reason to fear the opposition of the immortals, and they dreaded defeat. So the king sent swift messengers to all parts of the world to summon every evil creature to his aid. And on the third day after the declaration of war, a mighty army was at the command of the King Ogre. There were 300 Asiatic dragons breathing fire that consumed everything it touched. These hated mankind and all good spirits. And there were the three-eyed giants of Tartary, a host in themselves, who liked nothing better than to fight. And next came the black demons from Patagonia, with great spreading wings like those of a bat, which swept terror and misery through the world as they beat upon the air. And joined to these were the goozle goblins, with long talons as sharp as swords, with which they clawed the flesh from their foes. Finally, every mountain ogre in the world had come to participate in the great battle with the immortals. The King Ogre looked around upon his vast army, and his heart beat high with wicked pride, for he believed he would surely triumph over his gentle enemies, who had never before been known to fight. But the Master Woodsman had not been idle. None of his people were used to warfare, yet now they were called upon to face the hosts of evil. They willingly prepared for the fray. Uck had commanded them to assemble in the Laughing Valley, where Claus, ignorant of the terrible battle that was to be waged on his account, was quietly making his toys. Soon the entire valley, from hill to hill, was filled with the little immortals. The Master Woodsman stood first, bearing a gleaming axe that shone like burnished silver. Next came the Rolls, armed with sharp thorns from bramble bushes. Then the Knooks, bearing the spears they used, when they were forced to prod their savage beasts into submission. The fairies, dressed in white gauze with rainbow-hued wings, bore golden wands, and the wood nymphs, in their uniforms of oak-leaf green, carried switches from ash trees as weapons. Loud laughed the Ogre King when he beheld the size and the arms of his foes. To be sure, the mighty axe of the woodsman was to be dreaded, but the sweet-faced nymphs and pretty fairies, the gentle rills and crooked knooks, were such harmless folk that he felt almost shame at having called such a terrible host to oppose them. Since these fools dare fight, he said to the leader of the Tartary giants, I will overwhelm them with our evil powers. To begin the battle, he poised a great stone in his left hand, and cast it full against the sturdy form of the Master Woodsman, who turned it aside with his axe. Then rushed the three-eyed giants of Tartary upon the Knooks, and the goozle goblins upon the Rolls, and the fire-breathing dragons upon the sweet fairies. Because the nymphs were Uck's own people, the band of augurs sought them out, thinking to overcome them with ease. But it is the law that while evil, unopposed, may accomplish terrible deeds, the powers of good can never be overthrown when opposed to evil. Well had it been for the King Ogre had he known the law. His ignorance cost him his existence. For one flash of the axe borne by the Master Woodsman of the world, cleft the wicked king in twain, and rid the earth of the vilest creature it contained. Greatly marvelled the Tartary giants when the spears of the little knooks pierced the thick walls of flesh, and sent them reeling to the ground with howls of agony. Woe came upon the sharp-taloned goblins, when the thorns of the rills reached their savage hearts, and let their lifeblood sprinkle all the plain, and afterward from every drop a thistle grew. The dragons paused astonished before the fairy wands, from whence rushed a power that caused their fiery breaths to blow back on themselves, so that they shriveled away and died. As for the augurs, they had scant time to realize how they were destroyed, for the ash switches of the nymphs bore a charm unknown to any augur, and turned their foes into clods of earth at the slightest touch. When Uck, leaning upon his gleaming axe, and turned to look over the field of battle, he saw the few giants who were able to run disappearing over the distant hills on their return to Tartary. The goblins had perished every one, as had the terrible dragons, while all that remained of the wicked augurs was a great number of earthen hillocks dotting the plain. And now the immortals melted from the valley like dew at sunrise, to resume their duties in the forest, while Uck walked slowly and thoughtfully to the house of claws and entered. "You have many toys ready for the children," said the woodsman, "and now you may carry them across the plain to the dwellings and the villages without fear." "Will not the augurs harm me?" asked Claws eagerly. "The augurs," said Uck, "have perished. Now I will gladly have done with wicked spirits and with fighting and bloodshed. It is not from choice that are told of the augurs and their allies, and of their great battle with the immortals. They were parts of this history and could not be avoided." And on that slightly exciting and touch-violent note, I'm going to call it a night. As always, if you'd like to pick up where we've left off, you can find the book, The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, by L. Frank Baum, up on Project Gutenberg, at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes are released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.